Please help me welcome Tom.
Thank you. How many of you happen to be farmers here? I don't expect many. But one of the things that, okay, when I put that word up there, what's some of the things that come to mind? Yes. But as I thought about this, I'm from the Detroit side of the state. And when you're over there, what do they think about? Parts. So, looking at that, what's the difference between an inspection and an audit? Okay, there's the way I defined an audit. It's clarification and verification against a voluntary standard. And there's some of them listed up there. 9,001, 14,000, 22,000. Now, when you get into the SQ, FBRC, and FSSC, you're looking at the food standards, which were supposed to fit the situation with the Food Safety Modernization Act, but when it was finalized, none of them do. So they get the joy of rewriting them all. But what can happen is if you go through an audit to one of these standards, you get issued a nonconformance, and you're given a time frame to complete that or to bring it into compliance, right? You're not. It's voluntary. If you want to maintain your certification to these different standards, you're going to do. Now, when we look at an inspection, we're looking at the same idea, but the standard is now a federal, state, local standard that you're looking at. Now, the real difference between those is that when I come in okay. These are the things, they don't issue nonconformance, they issue noncompliances. And often, as they issue those noncompliances, they can carry chains and locks, close a place down. They can add some stiff penalties. And that's what I look at as the difference. And we see these more and more and more today. And what we've got up here, this is the National Organic Program, the Food Safety Modernization Act, Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. You've got your state food law. Has anybody here taken or tried to read the Michigan State food law? And what some of the things they can do? Did you know that every food company that operates in the state of Michigan has to register with the state of Michigan? And I use the term loosely because there are a number of them that are out there that don't. I was in a company, which was kind of fascinating. The fine he got from the FDA was he had to pay to be inspected every 3 months. And this was a small company. These things can get expensive fast. Now, before you look at that, when I say the word organic, what do you think about? How would you define organic? Pardon? Okay. Anybody else? That's what you see up on the screen, a production system that is managed in accordance with the Act and regulations to respond to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practice that foster the cycling of resources that promotes ecological balance and conserves diversity. That's a whole lot of words. That's a copy of the standard from the Federal Register. Now, what I get when I pose the question, what is organic, is the first thing they say is it's chemical free. There's no place in there that says it's chemical free. There is a whole list of chemicals that are approved for use. But there's also another list that's not approved for it. But it's part of the standard that's called the national list. Okay, why are we doing inspections? Because what they're looking for is they're verifying, you know, the operation that wants to be certified organic has to go through and submit an application of how do they run their operation. Now, for a farm, that can be 25 to 30 pages. This isn't just a simple half page. They're going to provide what kind of water source do they have? Where do they buy their seeds? How much did they buy? And everything about that operation. Now, the minute I add livestock, that almost doubles. So if you've got a livestock farm, you're going to be submitting 40 to 50 pages of information to a certifier. Now that's where they start. How many of you have gone through the process of selecting a registrar for one of the ISO standards? If you're anywhere as involved in supply chain management, what you're going to find is it's almost like a supplier selection process. There's 45 certifiers that have the capability and are approved and registered with the USDA to issue an organic certification. Just like, you know, I'll pull a name off, NSF can do an ISO 9001. Or the BRC can be done by another group. Now, they do their research, and when you do that, what you have to do is you've got to realize you're going to be dealing with that company for a long time. So you're going to want to build a good relationship, because where you communicate with them and they communicate with you and you understand each other, what they're looking for and what you have. Now, after you've got that, this is where they pick the certifier. Now they start through the paperwork process. And like I said, that can be a complex operation. Now that shows up at this certifier, and they go through it. They have a group of people there that go through this thing and say, is everything that I need to be able to certify that there? What they used to be able to do was send it directly to an inspector and say to that inspector, pick it up at the inspection. I need this, this, and this. Well, the USDA said, you have to have it in hand before that file can be released to an inspector. So that's the purpose of the initial review, so that they see what they have. Now, then they give it to an inspector. The interesting thing from that is most of the certifying bodies use a very, very limited amount, if any, of staff inspectors. Most of them are contracted. An awful lot of the organic inspectors are part-time jobs, supplemental income along with everything else. I'll be honest with you, mine was a full-time job, because you can get work from any certifier around the world. There's 45 in the United States and 55 around outside the United States. Now, once I get that file as an inspector, you have to go through it, evaluate it from an inspection perspective. What do I need to look at when I hit the farm or the processing plant? I'm the guy then that has to make the phone call to make the arrangements. In a lot of cases, you know, you're calling up a farmer and saying, hey, wait a minute, I need you to do it this day. Are you available? I'm going to say 90–95% of the time there's no issue with scheduling. You know, you don't try to do, like I would not be trying to do a whole lot of farms in the next 2 or 3 weeks, because it's harvest time. They're going to be running combines. Now, when I'm done, you submit a 10 to 15, 20-page report to the certifier. And once it arrives there, they pick up what they had in my report, and then they go along with the standard to another reviewer to take a look at what they think. It's another set of eyes. Out of that comes the recommendation that goes to the final certifier. That, you know, there's one person in the organization normally, maybe a group of 2 or 3, that can say this is acceptable. And what they can get is the same thing that you would see as the results of an audit to a voluntary standard. I can be registered. In this case, the certification is granted, denied, or granted with requirements. Now let's look at, what do we look at if you get onto a crop farm? You have to go to look at every field. Look at the maps that they provide for each field. The acres that are provided for each field. What's been in that field for the last 3 years? What kind of weeds do I see in the field and around the field? What could that tell me? The biggest issue is, did they spray? Because believe it or not, when you look at what weeds are in the field and what weeds are beside it, what's missing? Or are they the same? And you use almost other to defer, because that opens the door to be able to ask the question, what did you apply? Now, when you get into, you look in all the buildings, what do I see sitting around? How many of you are familiar with GMOs, genetically modified organisms? They're one of the things that are prohibited in organic production. Most herbicides, pesticides, and insecticides are prohibited. So as you look in the buildings, do you see any of these kind of things around? You look at, for example, any leftover seeds that were there. What are you looking for? If I go into a bag of corn, I better pick up and pull out corn seeds and see just corn seeds. If I pick up a seed and I see that it's green, blue, or red, I've got treated seed, GMO. Where did it go? You look at the equipment. One of the biggest tattletales you'll see on a farm when in the crop side is look at the planter. I should see a corn planter that may be black from graphite to make the corns flow. But I better not see any red or green. Because see, if they've put treated seed through that planter, it doesn't go away. That's the GMO. That's a prohibited substance. The coating is prohibited as well as the genetically modified. Huh? You have to buy that, yes. Pardon? It's a different, they use different treatments. I've seen them use red and blue and green. And that's the color of the chemicals that they treat it with. And what they're doing is they're genetically modifying that seed and then putting the fungicide or insecticide on the seed so that as that crop begins to grow, they can go through and spray it, for example, with Roundup, and it will kill the weeds, but it won't kill their crop. If I applied Roundup on a typical organic field, it's going to kill everything because it's a non-selective herbicide, or that it'll kill any plant that's there. Pardon? No. They haven't yet. As you know, we talked earlier today about a lot of different records and things like that. What I have to look for is I need to see the invoices for their seed purpose, what they bought, from where, how much you got left. Because what I'm looking for is, did they buy enough seed that qualified to be able to plant that field? I had a fellow that purchased 500 pounds of organic soybean seed to plant 500 acres. Perfect records for those 500 pounds of seed. He had less than enough to plant 50 acres. And he was trying to plant that field. And I said, where did the rest of the seed go? And it was GMO seed. And he did not get certified. But that's the purpose of the inspection. Because when you see an organic label on a product, the USDA organic, The USDA wants the consumer to believe that it's good. And that's why they go through the inspection process. You look at soil tests. If you're doing a good crop rotation, that organic matter and the NPK content of that soil should be changing so that you're seeing the fertility and the composition of that soil change over time. And if they're managing it ecologically correct, that will happen. Look at harvest data. What kind of yields did we get from the prior year? You learn what is a consistent yield for a crop in your area. Now, what they do allow is they have what is they call a split operation, where you can have part of your fields as organic and the rest can be conventional. This is where this stuff becomes critical. Because is there commingling? Is there non-organic crop being sold as organic? Now, the problem that people don't, if you get on the internet, there's all kinds of tales about organic. But to be honest with you, the penalties can get real steep. In the standard, there's an $11,000 per violation that's determined by what, the USDA determines what the number of violations. Like if you mislabel this, they could say the entire lot's 11,000, or they could say each jar's 11,000. You can go through a lot of money quick. Last quarter, there was $972,000 in fines levied. How many of you are familiar with lot numbers? We all see those in traceability, right? In the food industry, it's worse because they want to be able to track in the grain industry, you can get to the field. But they want to go from the seed that went into that field to the finished good when you buy it. In other words, like for example, if you bought a loaf of bread at the supermarket, the lot number that's applied on that loaf of bread should be able to be traced back all the way to the field and the seed that went into that. And I can assure you I've seen that, and it's possible with the system that's here, the way they're implementing. Manure applications. If you've got a crop that fruit, for example, wheat and corn, that's above ground, you can apply manure no later than 90 days before the harvest. If it's a crop that touches the ground or is below ground, an example of carrots, turnips, something like that, it's 120 days. You have to look for that. Did they do a seed search? Because they're looking that they want the farmers to buy organic seed. But if it's not available in the quantities, they are allowed to use non-GMO seeds. But you have to be able to show that you did a valid seed search. This is where it gets fun. Inputs. What did they put in? What did they apply to the ground? This is where 9 out of 10 times if you find something, you're going to find it here because this is where they're putting stuff in. You know, this is like, for example, the fertilizers, micronutrients, the special metals, and things like that. Pardon? Yes. By field, by amount. And it's amazing. Most of them today are being done by hand. But there was a young man up in Cairo that developed a software package that hooks onto the combine. Okay? You know, you can get tractors and GPS systems now that'll run your tractors for you. Okay? He can take that GPS system and pick up the harvest records from the combine and put them right into the bin and show you bin levels and stuff like this and harvest records and everything like that live. Young man's probably 25 years old and he's made over probably $5-10 million already. And the software isn't that expensive. The big expense is the GPS system to make it work. How long does it take to do one of these? The shortest is normally 3 or 4 hours. I've been on them where you do 3,500 to 4,000 acres, and you might be there a day and a half. I had one set of farms that the guy was 3 hours away from one to the other. And it depends on the distance, how long. This is where the fun starts. You look at all of the animals. I'm not a vet. Never was, never want to be. But what I learned is if you look at the front, the back, and the side of a cow, as an example, you can tell by looking, did that cow eat well today, the last week, the last month, by the body shape. And you can tell a tremendous amount about the health of that animal by looking at them and watching the way they move and the way they behave on the field. You know, as an example, if I walk on and you see 100 cows in a field, I would expect to see about 40 to 50% of them laying down. But the other ones may be standing up eating, but they're all in a group. Because a cow is a herding type animal, they all want to stay together. If you see one that's off by itself, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with that animal. And you get a good intention of what's going on. Now, you look at, what are they feeding them? How much? I laugh. I went, you know, when they used to have the state fair, they would show these rations for the cows, the kids. I got in trouble. I walked by and told my wife they're killing those cows. If they fed them that much, they'd be dead tomorrow. And somebody there heard me and but what they're looking at here is how much each one of these kinds of cows takes different amount of feed. what kind of pasture do they have? How much? Is there enough? What's the grass condition on them? Based on the size of the animal, there are tables provided that tell you how much dry matter that animal needs to live. Okay? And they just added the pasture rule to this to where they want 30% of that dry matter to come from pasture. Previously, you could have the big stockyards. Not now. You've got to have the cows on pasture. You can't put them in a shed and leave them there. This is where most of them with livestock have difficulties. What you're trying to do is how much did I harvest, how much did I feed, and how much did I buy? To be able to verify that there was enough feed available for those animals that was certified organic. A few years ago in Ohio, there was a drought. And there was a lot of farmers paying an awful lot of money to transport hay from Montana to Ohio to be able to feed their organic animals. An awful lot of the farmers sold off their herds because they couldn't afford to feed them. Now, the other thing with livestock is a dairy cow can have certified organic milk after they've been on organic feed for 1 year. But that animal can never be slaughtered as organic meat. But if a calf is born after they've been fed a third of the gestation with organic feed, that animal can be certified as organic slaughter stock. And that's where we get the organic meat. Now, if you go to a processing facility, you walk the entire operation. What am I looking for when you walk that? You're looking at where is the possibility of contamination and commingling. Most of the processing facilities that are out there today are normally maximum 5% organic. Because if I go to a facility that's making these organic pretzels, the chances are they're making all kinds of other pretzels. The other issue, where can they get commingling? Do they clean stuff up? This is probably one of the hardest things for them to do. You can do it with a simple spreadsheet, but what you do is you take a commodity. What did I start with? What did I buy? What have I got left? And I've got that number, okay? But now I take my finished product inventory and find out how much of that ingredient was in it, how much did I produce, and how much have I got left for that same ingredient. And by doing that, I should get the same number, right? Now, if I look at my sales and I calculate it down to that same ingredient. The third number. I should have 3 numbers that match. And what that's doing is essentially verifying that there was enough organic products purchased for the amount of material that was labeled and sold as organic. One of the things they have to do is keep a record. We're all familiar with approved supplier list, okay? You have to have an approved supplier list with a current copy of the organic certification. So, you start back through. You pick a finished product, you go back to the ingredients, you pick a couple ingredients, you go back to the supplier, when did it come in, who did it come in from, and then you go on back to the organic certificate, and are they on the supplier list? In a processing plant, this is probably one of the biggest areas they deal with, because the cleaning products, one of the best cleaning products out there is a quaternary ammonium sanitizer. It's a prohibited substance in organic. And the reason that is because it leaves a residue. When you use it and wash it off, there's still a residue there. The greatest antimicrobial material out there, but it's prohibited. You end up using something like a bleach solution or a peroxide for the sanitizer. And as far, when you come in to do an organic inspection, did they do it? You're looking at the cleaning records. How did they clean the process before the organic run, to make sure that there wasn't any prohibited substance used beforehand? What kind of pest control are they using? And I look at something like this because there are prohibited substances, but also it gives a pretty good inkling of how are they keeping the plant clean. How many rodents and so on are they finding and catching and things like that? That gives you a pretty good idea of how they're maintaining the facility. One of the things they added to it is when they had the outbreak with Peanut Corporation of America. Are you all familiar with that? Where they had the salmonella in the peanut butter. That was the largest organic peanut butter plant in the United States. And 2 weeks before that, AIB, the American Institute of Baking, went in and did an audit and gave them a clean slate. So let me tell you, the food industry took a real hit with that. And as a result, the edict came down from the USDA that every inspector and every certifier had to identify food safety issues that exist on site, and if they were identified, they had to notify the USDA. And as a result, you see this kind of thing where you've got to look at any FDA reports, USDA, any of the GFSI standards, the Global Food Safety Initiative, and is there anything that they're writing up that is a potential food safety issue? Other than what was, what you observed as an inspector. Pardon? No. That auditor did his job, but they got the blame. Okay, he didn't crawl up in the ductwork over the reactors, and that's where the salmonella was, and it was falling back in. And if you didn't crawl up through there, you'd have never found it. The scary thing today is what the FDA is doing. They'll come into a food plant and they'll do what people call a swabathon. They'll come in and swab that facility with 1, 3, 500 swabs and take them and analyze them. They're primarily looking for Listeria monocytogenes and salmonella. If they find one, their database right now has 1 million unidentified DNA strains. And they're looking to match where those strains came from. If they find one that matches, you just bought the blame for whatever recall, whatever happened, became your problem. Most folks don't even realize this kind of thing is out there. But that's the potential. Now, in a situation like that, as we're at an inspection division, would you take samples with him? If he's taken 500 samples through my plant, would you take 500 with him and run them? Or would you just leave him alone and let him take his 500 and document where he took them? What would you do? Pardon? Yes, this is the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. That's the good answer. Because where you get into real trouble is if you take samples that are duplicate and by chance you get a different answer. Then what do you do? And that's why, in most cases, what's happening is they just let them take the samples and don't take any equivalent samples with it to avoid that kind of a situation. Yes. They've loaded all of the DNA data for all of the recalls. Yes. But they couldn't, and they've got a whole bunch of recalls that they've never identified where it came from.
So the jar or whatever didn't have a lot number on it,
Or they don't, all right. What they were doing for a long time, okay, like the spinach recalls and stuff like this that you can get into. People get sick. Okay, and they're trying to figure out where did it come from. Now, if you get sick with salmonella, it takes 2 weeks to develop where you're going to get sick with it. So now you've got 5 people sick in 5 different states. Yeah, but can you remember what you even ate 2 weeks ago? And see, they have those strains of DNA available of the salmonella, but they don't really know where they came from. And they're still trying to identify those. And what's scary is I was involved through the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development on an exercise where you had an issue like this with Canada. And you saw some interesting communication barriers of information that wasn't flowing. Most of the states in the Midwest cooperate very significantly, like Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. If there's something, a breakout, they're going to know it right now. And they're going to share it with each other. The most recent one that we had in Michigan was, how many of you are anywhere near Ann Arbor? Did you hear about the guy that walked into the Ann Arbor Whole Foods and sprayed a mixture of rat poison and antifreeze on the produce? Anybody hear about that? He did. Now, we immediately had the FBI. Was he a terrorist? You had Homeland Security. You had the local health department. Trying to figure out what's going on. The biggest issue was there were 15 grocery stores in Ann Arbor. They saw him on a video in the Whole Foods store. The other 15 didn't have the videos. Did he go there? That question had to be resolved by the local health department and all these other agencies before they could release the produce from those grocery stores. I mean, we were talking this morning about some on the recalls. The FDA website just rings like bells with recalls. I mean, I'll be honest with you, there's probably 5 or 6 recalls maybe every day or two of some kind of food. Yes. Most of them we don't, as consumers, unless you're getting the beeps from the FDA, you'll never know it because people don't go there and look. And a lot of times if you read it, it's not going to be something that necessarily affects you. But they've got people working on these things all the time. No, not necessarily. Most of the stuff from the FDA doesn't. Now you look at labels. Believe me, this is the one that people pick up the most fines for. Because the organic symbol is a circle, USDA organic. The standard specifies the size, where it can be located, and its color. It also says that it will have the statement certified by and the certifier that approved this product to be certified. That's the issue. How many organic restaurants have you been in? I've only seen one, and they didn't last. And you know why they can't be? It's a labeling issue. Yes. What's the label in a restaurant? The menu. Which means you cannot do any specials without getting the approval of the certifier. So it's not worth the hassle to do it. And it's amazing. You get into some of these, how many of you are familiar with what they call contract manufacturing? It's embedded in everything. It's tremendous in the food industry. Okay, like if I'm harvesting green beans, we go to the canning plant and they can the green beans. And they can them all in unlabeled cans with lot numbers and everything like that. You walk into the warehouse, you'll see the whole harvest of green beans sitting there in unlabeled cans. Kroger's calls up and said, I want 1,000 cases. They'll take 1,000 cases and they'll put Kroger's labels on it and send it out the door. Myers calls up, they'll do the same thing. What does that can say? Manufactured for distribution by Myers or Kroger. They don't identify where it was canned and where the source of the beans in the can came from. Yes? The average person doesn't. They wouldn't know how to read that lot number, but they know, and they know where it went. They have the traceability. But we live in a very, very, I'm going to say wild food system right now. When I started organic inspection, I was one of 2 inspectors in the state of Michigan. We had maybe 200 operations in Michigan. And so when I started out, I ended up in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan to get enough work to live. The business is growing at a rate of 15 to 20, 25% a year. Today, there are 600 operations in the state of Michigan that are certified organic. In the thumb area of Michigan alone, there's probably 30 or 40,000 acres of organic ground. How many of you heard of Chipotle? The restaurant. The majority of the black beans that Chipotle uses are grown right here in the state of Michigan.
Since it's question time, and we're almost over anyway, if the farmer that put the beans in the factory that put the beans in the can, how can they label it manufactured by Kroger? Because it
manufactured for distribution by.
Oh, manufactured for distribution by. Okay, all right, I got it.
And they show, in Kroger's case, they show the warehouse in Cincinnati.
Is there a distinction in inspection processes when something's labeled all natural as opposed to organic?
There is a process that they're working on, but I haven't seen how it works. There were some folks that, because what do you define as all natural? When you look at the complexity of what they've defined as organic, now how do I define what natural is? And that's where the big discussion gets into on that. There are people trying to do that to reduce some of the cost. But what's happened really is that the market has shifted. And I'll give you a couple quick examples. Conventional corn, a few months ago, was selling for $3.75 a bushel for the farmer, okay? At the same time, organic corn was being signed, sealed, and delivered. What would be coming off, this was in like the first of the year, there were no crops in. Organic corn was being contracted at $12 to $15 a bushel. Organic soybeans were selling for $36 to $38 a bushel. Conventional soybean, or non-GMO soybeans, which would be the transition, were going for $30 a bushel. Or conventional soybeans were 8 1/4. We're seeing our whole food chain change. And we need, in a way it's a good thing, because it's given us some. The other thing that was very interesting is it cost, like organic corn, cost about $2.50 a bushel to grow. Okay? Conventional corn costs $5, because you've got to pay the royalty for the seeds, you've got to pay for all the herbicides, insecticides, and pesticides. And you can't save the seeds. You've got to buy new seeds every year. Organic seeds are a possibility that you could save your own seeds and replant them next year. Other question? Pardon?
You said that last quarter there was like 970,000 in penalties for
Yes.
organic farmers. Is this national or Michigan?
National.
Okay.
Issued by the USDA.
So not much.
Huh?
So it's not too much penalty for not following.
Well, it hits the agents, I'm going to say that probably 90 to 95% or higher of the people are attempting to do it right. You only have a couple bad apples, but those bad apples get weeded out, they get penalized. The other thing that happens is if you get a certificate suspended or revoked, you've got to wait 5 years before you can even reapply. So, it's hitting them in the pocketbook.
And how many inspections do they get per year?
1. Every organic operation is required to be inspected annually. There's 37,000 operations worldwide, probably 18,000 of them in the United States. And they each have to be done once a year. 600. Pardon?
Well, he asked a question about inspections. How many audits do you have to do, and how frequently do you have to do audits on this organic food people?
They get inspected once a year, and that's like they're verified once a year that they're in compliance with the organic standard. They don't do more than that. They go through, and it's an extensive process. The last year, I just recently retired, but the last year I did it, I ended up getting 360 inspections. And believe me, they weren't all in Michigan. They were in Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. But I had calls to go to China, to go to Argentina, go down to Mexico. My wife put her foot down. They asked me to go to Mexico and do one sugarcane place, and they would provide security. They would provide bodyguard. My wife says, "You ain't taking that one." Other questions? There's 17,500 certified entities. That's farms and processing plants. The USDA has a database that has all of the certified entities listed on it. And what I did was just sort it out in Michigan and printed off who they are. in the 600. And as I was looking at it, I'll be honest with you, I'd probably been on 95% of these farms and processing plants.
All right, folks, if there's no more questions, we're about 5 minutes over. Appreciate it, Larry. Let's give him a big hand.